Okay, so now we need to quickly finish up our discussion about relativism. We just finished the two arguments about disagreement in the last video. Besides these two arguments, there are a number of other issues with relativism, right? So we're just going to run through them all real quick just to show you how counterintuitive relativism is, right? So we're going to look at all these things on these lists, and basically the argument is that relativism implies that all of these things are true. And that's crazy. None of us accept, at least most of these things. You probably don't accept any of them. So if relativism implies that all these things are true, and we don't think any of them are true, then relativism is probably false, right? So the first thing is it claims that either all individuals or cultures are morally infallible. We already discussed this a little bit, but roughly the idea is that the individual can never be wrong about morality because morality is just the result of what the individual believes. And analogously for cultures, right? Morality is just the result of whatever your culture believes. So a culture can never be wrong about what's morally right and wrong. They can never be incorrect about what's morally right and wrong because it's just a result of what they believe. Secondly, relativism makes moral progress impossible. Right? And so why is this? Well, think about a culture. A culture has a set of beliefs that determine what's morally right and wrong. There's no sense in which you can progress from there, right? If your culture believes that slavery, for example, is morally permissible, and then we would normally say, look, eliminating slavery is progress. Well, how is that progress? Slavery was already morally right in that culture. To move to that next stage is just a change from one stage to another. It's just a change of beliefs, but it's not actually any progress in terms of morality. Progress requires that there's some independent standard about morality, and we're moving closer to that standard. Right? Relativism can't have that, right? You're not moving closer to any standard. There is no independent standard. It's just the result of what your culture believes. So we have not ever made any progress, and we could never make any progress according to moral relativism. This just seems crazy, right? There are so many counterexamples. We think slavery, the elimination of slavery, was a big step forward in terms of the morality of our society. The same with women's voting rights and equal marriage rights. Some of you might be, I guess, in favor of one or two of these, but I'm guessing that you think at least one of these, and if one of these counterexamples doesn't appeal to you, I'm guessing there's something else out there, right? There's some actions that you think we've taken that have made our society better than it was in the past. If you think that, then you already disagree here with moral relativism, right? Because progress is impossible for a relativist, and you think we've made progress. Okay, next, relativism implies that when you're arguing with somebody about what's right and what's wrong, what's really happening, if you're a subjectivist, I see I messed that up there. If you're a subjectivist, is you aren't arguing over what's right at all. You're basically just yelling what you believe about morality at one another. If morality is just a result of what you believe, what are you arguing about? If you say abortion's morally right, your friend says abortion's morally wrong, and you start arguing about it, you should both just stop and say, wait, this is pointless. I already know what I believe. I believe abortion's morally right. I already know what you believe. You believe abortion's morally wrong. End of discussion. There's nothing to argue about. Same with something similar with cultural relativism. When you're arguing about what's right and wrong, you're either just yelling about what your culture believes, or you're having a disagreement over what your shared culture believes. So there could be a reason to argue, but the argument there isn't over whether or not your culture is doing the right thing. The argument is just over, are we properly capturing what our culture believes? But that's not what we think we're arguing about, right? When we're arguing in the United States about whether or not abortion should be legalized or prohibited across the board, What we're arguing about is what the moral status of abortion is. We're not just saying, wait, we need to argue about what United States culture believes. Right? So if relativism is right, all of the arguments we get into just seem like nonsense. But we don't think they're nonsense. We think these arguments are actually important things that will have an impact on the world. We find them very important, right? And most people get heated when they're talking about things like whether or not abortion is permissible. You wouldn't get heated if you were just arguing about what a culture believes. You would get heated if you were arguing about what is in fact the right thing to do. So if relativism implies that about our arguments, it once again is probably wrong. Next, it gets the heroes and villains of history backwards. Right, so think about it this way. Let's take the example of Martin Luther King Jr. Right, so the culture of the American South claimed that it was morally permissible to subordinate African Americans, right, to make them lesser citizens. So when Martin Luther King was fighting for equality, he's actually sort of the villain in that scenario, according to relativism, right? Because society or the culture says, look, this subordination is permissible, and you're trying to get rid of that subordination. Right? You're claiming, Martin Luther King Jr. was claiming, that subordination is morally wrong. But if relativism is right, Martin Luther King is in the wrong there, right? When he says, look, subordination is morally wrong, everybody in the South should say, no, look at the culture. The culture says it's morally permissible. You just have it wrong, Martin Luther King. But that's not the case, right? We think, at least most of us think, that Martin Luther King was in the right. He was tracking the truth about morality. He was helping us make progress. He was actually the hero in that story, not just some neutral person who got the culture wrong or some villain who was acting counter to the culture. Right? And then likewise with Nazi Germany, right? Yeah, we don't need to go through that one. It's the same type of example, right? If all of the Nazi Germany, if the culture of Nazi Germany claimed that elimination of the Jews was the morally right thing to do, then when they were eliminating the Jews, they were actually doing the right thing. And that just seems crazy. Okay, and then there are a few other issues we need to go over pretty quickly. This one we've been talking about sort of the whole entire time, right? We can't legitimately criticize the practices of other cultures, right? So there are some cultures in the world that practice genital mutilation on young women. There have been plenty of cultures who practiced ethnic cleansing. Some religious cultures in the past, and even currently, practice the burning of heretics, right? We think these are all sort of atrocities. We think these are terrible things that are happening in the world, and we want to criticize other cultures for doing them. But if relativism is true, we can't criticize those cultures, right? They're doing what is right, since morality is just dictated by the beliefs of the culture. Next, when we're thinking about cultural relativism, it seems impossible for most of us to know what to do. Since we would have to identify our true culture. So think of it this way. Most of you are members of different cultures, each with differing sets of beliefs. So myself, I'm part of an academic culture, a white culture, a suburban culture. I've been in punk rock bands most of my life, so I'm part of like an underground rock culture. I create music, so I'm part of a musician culture. So on and so forth, right? Name all the different cultures you're part of. Okay, well, which one is your true culture? Can you pick that out? I doubt you can. And if you can't pick that out just for yourself, well, then how are we ever going to do that for the entire United States? Right? So we want to know whether or not recreational marijuana should be legalized. Well, we just have to appeal to the culture of the United States. Wait, what is that? Is it white culture, black culture, gay culture, straight culture, urban, suburban, so on and so forth, religious, atheist culture, right? We have so many different cultures that all have wildly conflicting, contradictory beliefs about what's morally right and wrong. So it seems like it's impossible to identify our true culture. And if we can't identify our true culture, then we don't know what's morally right and wrong. So we'd never know what to do if relativism is true. And then finally, some have claimed that cultural relativism leads to tolerance. And this is supposed to be a point in favor of relativism because tolerance is something we should practice. It's hard to know what the truth is. And a lot of cultures have a lot of meaning for the lives that people lead, and so we should tolerate them and allow them to live lives that they see fit. But this just doesn't seem true either. Tolerance is a good value, but if you're going to claim that cultural relativism leads to tolerance, one of two things are going to happen. Either the person is claiming that tolerance is just something that's good, right? They're saying, look, we should respect relativism because relativism leads to tolerance and tolerance is a good thing. But notice, they're making an objective claim about tolerance. They're saying, look, tolerance is good. That means it's objectively good. But that's a problem because that undermines relativism immediately, right? There is no objective good according to cultural relativism. So if it leads to tolerance and they claim that's good, they're undermining themselves. Or on the other hand, when they say tolerance is good, all they mean is tolerance is good in our culture. But then that doesn't really get them anywhere, right? Because then intolerance would also be justified for any culture that believes intolerance is good. So then relativism wouldn't actually lead to tolerance in the first place. It would only lead to tolerance where cultures believed tolerance was good. So this argument's not going to work either. So now you've seen the plethora of problems there are for moral relativism, both in its subjectivist and cultural relativist form. And so for the rest of the semester, we're just going to assume that cultural relativism is false and work within a moral objectivist framework. So that's it for our lecture on relativism. And thank you, everyone.